5, The Batman, starring Robert Pattinson, Zoe Kravitz, and Jeffrey Wright. Batman coming in at number 5 on Cameron's list. What's going on here, Cameron?
Well, I love the Batman. Again, I'm Mr. Controversial because again, that's a lot of people pan the Batman. Again, everyone has a right to like or not dislike anything. I think some of that was just unhappiness in general with how DC has been treating these characters. And I think the reason I love the Batman is, to me, the freshest take on this character in a while. It's the only one that I've seen that I can remember that really gets into him being a detective, like he's the world's greatest detective, which was what the original tagline of this character was in the comic. And it gets into this guy's serious trauma. The other movies have hidden, like you see him as a child and watching his parents being killed, and it's sort of like this guy's crazy, but you're not seeing it in his face. And then his face is hidden behind the mask. Pattinson really brought in, this is an early Batman who is still deeply psychologically damaged and doesn't yet know how to hide that to play the billionaire playboy role that he's got to play. Because I think, commentators have said that that Batman is his true self, the psychologically damaged crime fighter, whereas Bruce Wayne is his persona. Well, he hasn't yet developed a persona yet, right, of Bruce Wayne. And that's the fun of this, is watching him throughout the course of this movie come to realize it ain't going to work. The morose, the hermit is not going to help him achieve his objectives. He's got to be two men, right? And that's where I think that movie was leading us towards. And the cinematography was stunning. I'm a New Yorker. I'm from Brooklyn, and I felt like this is exactly what would happen in a real Gotham, right? I mean, the moment that when he emerged out of the subway in the shadows, the opening thing as Batman, I mean, that took my breath away, right? And cool. And to me, it was the most psychologically real of these films. And so I loved it. My understanding is that it may continue on a parallel track. We still haven't heard what James Gunn's going to do, but someone on my Patreon suggested that today, that I have to go look at what he posted, but he suggested he had found evidence that James Gunn was going to at least continue this version as a parallel separate track from whatever else he's going to do with Batman as a separate character. I hope so, because I like this world.
Coming in at number 4, Prey, starring Amber Mid-Thunder and directed by Dan Trachtenberg.
I actually went to see it in a special screening with a mentee of mine who's a Native American writer, and setting aside my personal enjoyment of the film, watching her excitement to see natives portrayed in this heroic fashion and in a great movie. It's not there for representation, right? This is the most fun I've had at a Predator movie since the original movie. It's something like what I talked about Scream, right? This resurrected the franchise for me, which has become very moribund. And even with bringing the alien, bringing all these things in, it was just the same old stuff. I'd never seen anything like this, right? The Predator several centuries ago, hunting human beings and being taken on by a tribe of Native Americans. And I worked with Amber Mid-Thunder on Roswell, New Mexico, and she's a superb actor. She's got a big journey ahead of her, right? But, aside from any personal connection with her, that's not the reason. Her performance here was wonderful. And the journey of her character, again, people said, it's going to be woke because it's about oppressed indigenous people. That's not what this movie is about. No. And it's actually about her journey to learn how to be a heroine, because she isn't the Mary Sue we've been complaining about. She's the one that figures out there's this supernatural or scientific, this creature. She's figured it out. No one believes her. And then she tries to take it on herself and she gets her ass kicked, as you would expect. People are like, I don't believe this 90-pound Native American woman can take on the Predator. She can't take it on. And she gets her ass kicked, and it's her brother who has to come rescue her. And it's about a sibling relationship and how her brother teaches her how to become a hero, and how you cannot take on the Predator. You can, however, outsmart it. And that's what she learns to do. And it just pulled me in. And the fact that they made a separate version of this movie in Native American language. they filmed a parallel version of this movie in Native language. That shows commitment. And so I love this film. I tell people, watch this film. It really made my heart soar about what is possible in filmmaking.
Number 3, Top Gun Maverick, starring Tom Cruise as well as Miles Teller and Glenn Powell.
we talked about it a lot. I mean, I think that what it was something that was necessary for Hollywood. It was a reset to old-fashioned storytelling, which is, this was a franchise from my childhood, from the '80s, right? And this is, we've held back 40 years for it to come back again, and it felt like we were being taken back to the '80s. It was a respectful film that was patriotic, that was unifying, that was heroic, and it wasn't a lectury America sucks stuff. It's I'm an immigrant to this country. There's a lot of critiques you can make of this country. I've also seen much of the world, and everything else sucks even worse, especially the places that pretend to be better than this place. I've been to Europe. I've studied in Europe. I've worked there, and it's even more bigoted and racist and Islamophobic there. And so this is the best country on earth, and to my experience, and the fact that you can get a feeling of being proud of what America can be. Is it a perfect country with a perfect history? Not at all. But it has an ideal, which most countries don't have. Most countries are just, I'm there because of a historical circumstance of a bunch of tribes in this area and a language. This is a country that at least had a theoretical ideal, that it may not have always lived up to, but it has still that. And this captured that feeling of patriotism, which is different than nationalism. There's a pride that this movie inspires and makes people remember what America used to be in the '80s, right? It was the inspiring thing that made people stand up to communism and bring down the Berlin Wall, right? That's the feeling you get out of this film, and that's why it moved me so much.
Coming in at number 2 is the horror hit Smile.
I think this is the best horror movie I've seen this year, and best horror movie I've seen in a few years, right? I actually not only saw it myself, when I went to visit my sister in Pennsylvania, I took her and her teenage son to see it, right? It is scary. It is disturbing. Again, like any good horror movie, it uses all these old tropes you've seen before, but it puts them together in ways you've never seen before. And this idea, it explores something that's profound that I've never seen in a horror movie, which is the idea of the monster itself is a manifestation of trauma. It's like the trauma itself is a virus. It's a disease. It spreads from one person to the other, and in this form, it takes this horrific form here. And one of the things that was very personal to me is I have members of my family who are schizophrenic, and this movie deals with schizophrenia as a central element of it, of the pain that a family member feels when one of their loved ones is schizophrenic, right? And that's a central element to this film. And it was actually very hard for me to watch those parts because it threw me back to parts of my personal life where I'd experienced some of the pain of the character. When we're not dealing with a demonic monster, we're just dealing with the monster of her life history, dealing with a schizophrenic relative, right? And that's what I said to my sister. I was like, she also experienced those things. It's like, I told her, this is going to be hard to watch for us. And it was hard for her, but it was actually in many ways catalytic. It was cleansing, right? It's a scary, 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 scary film, and that's why I put it at number 2. It's done something that I don't think a horror movie has done in a long time. The closest that came was It Follows, but this is deeper than It Follows because it's about the human psyche and about pain.
And Kamran Pasha's number 1 movie of the year, Elvis, starring Tom Hanks and Austin Butler. All right. Kamran Pasha, why is Elvis number 1?
So this is the movie, Rosa. I didn't see it 12 times. I think I saw it 5 times, and I did see it in the theater. And I loved this movie so much. It hit me very deeply. I didn't know much about Elvis. After this movie, I went and got biographies of him. I went and got some of Elvis's music that I hadn't heard. And this movie, there's been a lot of biopics of Elvis going back to shortly after he passed away in the 70s, right? However, this is the first movie that captures something that was central to his identity. That
You're mute. I apologize.
I'm not film, which is
hold on.
I'm back. I'm sorry, I froze.
You're
the
back?
universe doesn't want me talking about Elvis. It's a conspiracy.
Central to your identity. Let's go back to that.
So what was unique, what was so central to what Elvis' identity was that has never been portrayed is that he was essentially the poor white kid raised in a community of black people, right? And got all of his music from that and was very deeply invested in the community. And one of the most shocking things I heard from people that refused to go see the film, younger kids were like, I heard Elvis was a racist. That's the exact opposite of what he was. That's the exact opposite of what he was. He dedicated, he was a devout Christian, and he was also, he was more comfortable with black people than white people, and he elevated black artists. And I went back and I read an interview that he did in Jet magazine in 1957, that Elvis Presley, who was just becoming the biggest star on the planet in 1957, did an interview with Jet magazine.
Wow.
And he credited all of his stuff to black artists. He said, rock and roll isn't me. Rock and roll, and he lists the artists. He's like, rock and roll is all these black artists. They do it better than me, right? I'm mimicking them. He said that in 57 to Jet magazine. And so he dedicated his life to really advancing civil rights, in ways subtly behind the scenes. That movie shows that Colonel Tom Parker, his manager, didn't want him getting involved in politics, right?
Yeah.
If
anything, it was Colonel Tom Parker that was a little bit of a,
Yeah, that had, he was, to him, race was something he could use to make money, right? And so that was his perspective. But, there's one of the greatest moments, and this movie is great in the sense it captures how Elvis created the modern rock star single-handedly. This phenomenon did not exist. What we associate now, we go hang out at a concert, people are screaming, all this stuff, people throwing, women throwing their undies at the stage, right? This all happened with him. There was no prototype for this. This kid, essentially this 18-year-old kid, is experiencing the rock star phenomenon as the archetype that makes it up as he goes along, right? And he's overwhelmed by it, and he doesn't know how to handle it. And yet he somehow still keeps a core of him that's moral, despite all the corruption that comes with that. And the most emotional scene in this film for me was the moment when we do his famous comeback special, right? He had been, he was huge in the 50s, early 60s. He kind of fell off the map by doing a lot of dumb movies, and then he'd become sort of a joke by the late 60s. And then he does this comeback special. I believe it was on NBC, and he does a comeback special Christmas show, and And it culminates with a song that Colonel Tom Parker didn't want him to do, a song that he had specifically had written for this occasion, which was a song, If I Could Dream, right? It's a song that basically is an answer to Martin Luther King's I have a dream, right? Because King had just been assassinated. Yeah, I have a dream speech.
And he just was assassinated in 1968, correct.
Right. And so he did this song, and Austin Butler captures him throughout. It's amazing how you forget you're watching Austin, but you think you're watching Elvis, right? Yeah. And he captures the body language, the tone, and the essence, the soul of it. But in this moment, he captures the passion of that song, which then I went back on YouTube and watched it. And it's this incredible song, which is saying, I have this dream. Why can't our brothers walk hand in hand? And why won't God answer that, right? And it's this profound gospel song that had never been, he wrote it specifically for this. He had it written. He wasn't a writer. He had it written for this moment. And he did it in one take where you can see the tears in his eyes and his heart overwhelming at King's death. And this shook up America. This guy who had been publicly non-political, doing this song that shakes you to your core at the height of, Martin Luther King's been assassinated, Malcolm X has died a few years before, Robert Kennedy just got killed. This is the craziest moment in history. And he's doing this song of reconciliation when his manager's like, don't do it, stay out of this thing, right? And this movie hit me so much for that. I'm now on a journey of rediscovering Elvis, and I'm listening to these songs. Yeah, I'm listening to these songs.
The way I remember you raving about this film in the summer, I thought you were already an Elvis fan.
No, this made me an Elvis fan. I didn't know much about Elvis. Elvis. And now I've gone back. I watched his Hawaii special on YouTube. I've got CDs of some of his greatest songs. I've got a CD of his gospel songs. Those are the only things everyone Grammys for. His gospel songs are incredible, right? But I'm listening to these songs. I'm like, dude, these are bopping, man. They're bopping in 2022. You can't stop listening to these songs. And this guy was an archetypal figure, and much like Marilyn Monroe was, someone that's essentially a cosmic archetype that comes into human form. And so this movie, if you haven't seen it, it'll blow you away.
It'll blow you